Section 14 of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Section 14. Since she was so unhappy, for weeks and weeks now, Risha had given meanings to things that happened, almost felt sometimes that she must stop people in the street if they looked good, kind people, just to say to them, "I am unhappy." And this old woman singing in the street, "If someone should see, what matter they," made her suddenly quite sure that everything was going to be right. They were going to Sir William Bradshaw. She thought his name sounded nice. He would cure Septimus at once. And then there was a brewer's cart, and the grey horses had upright bristles of straw in their tails. There were newspaper placards. It was a silly, silly dream, being unhappy. So they crossed Mr. and Mrs. Septimus Warren Smith. And was there, after all, anything to draw attention to them, anything to make a passer-by suspect here is a young man who carries in him the greatest message in the world, and is, moreover, the happiest man in the world, and the most miserable? Perhaps they walked more slowly than other people, and there was something hesitating, trailing in the man's walk. But what more natural for a clerk who has not been in the West End on a weekday at this hour for years than to keep looking at the sky, looking at this, that, and the other, as if Portland Place were a room he had come into when the family are away, the chandeliers being hung in holland bags, and the caretaker, as she lets in long shafts of dusty light upon deserted, queer-looking armchairs, lifting one corner of the long blinds, explains to the visitors what a wonderful place it is, how wonderful, but at the same time he thinks, as he looks at chairs and tables, how strange. To look at, he might have been a clerk, but of the better sort, for he wore brown boots, his hands were educated, so too his profile, his angular, big-nosed, intelligent, sensitive profile, but not his lips altogether, for they were loose, and his eyes, as eyes tend to be, eyes merely, hazel, large, so that he was, on the whole, a border case, neither one thing nor the other. Might end with a house at Purley and a motor car, or continue renting apartments in back streets all his life. One of those half-educated, self-educated men whose education is all learnt from books borrowed from public libraries, read in the evening after the day's work, on the advice of well-known authors consulted by letter. As for the other experiences, the solitary ones, which people go through alone in their bedrooms, in their offices, walking the fields and the streets of London, he had them. Had left home, a mere boy, because of his mother. She lied. Because he came down to tea for the 50th time with his hands unwashed. Because he could see no future for a poet in Stroud. And so, making a confidant of his little sister, had gone to London, leaving an absurd note behind him, such as great men have written, and the world has read later when the story of their struggles has become famous. London has swallowed up many millions of young men called Smith, thought nothing of fantastic Christian names like Septimus, with which their parents have thought to distinguish them. Lodging off the Euston Road, there were experiences, again experiences, such as change a face in 2 years from a pink innocent oval to a face lean, contracted, hostile. But of all this, what could the most observant of friends have said, except what a gardener says when he opens the conservatory door in the morning and finds a new blossom on his plant? It has flowered. Flowered from vanity, ambition, idealism, passion, loneliness, courage, laziness, the usual seeds, which all muddled up, in a room off the Euston Road, made him shy and stammering, made him anxious to improve himself, made him fall in love with Miss Isabel Pole, lecturing in the Waterloo Road upon Shakespeare. Was he not like Keats, she asked, and reflected how she might give him a taste of Antony and Cleopatra and the rest. Lent him books, wrote him scraps of letters, and lit in him such a fire as burns only once in a lifetime, without heat, flickering a red-gold flame infinitely ethereal and insubstantial over Miss Pole, Antony and Cleopatra, and the Waterloo Road. He thought her beautiful, believed her impeccably wise, dreamed of her, wrote poems to her, which, ignoring the subject, she corrected in red ink. He saw her one summer evening, walking in a green dress in a square. "It has flowered," the gardener might have said, had he opened the door, had he come in, that is to say, any night about this time, and found him writing, found him tearing up his writing, found him finishing a masterpiece at 3 o'clock in the morning, and running out to pace the streets, and visiting churches, and fasting one day, drinking another, devouring Shakespeare, Darwin, the history of civilization, and Bernard Shaw. Something was up, Mr. Brewer knew. Mr. Brewer, managing clerk at Sibley's and Arrowsmith's, auctioneers, valuers, land and estate agents. Something was up, he thought, and being paternal with his young men, and thinking very highly of Smith's abilities, and prophesying that he would, in 10 or 15 years, succeed to the leather armchair in the inner room under the skylight with the deed boxes round him. "If he keeps his health," said Mr. Brewer, and that was the danger. He looked weakly, advised football, invited him to supper, and was seeing his way to consider recommending a rise of salary, when something happened which threw out many of Mr. Brewer's calculations, took away his ablest young fellows, and eventually, so prying and insidious were the fingers of the European war, smashed a plaster cast of Serres, ploughed a hole in the geranium beds, and utterly ruined the cook's nerves at Mr. Brewer's establishment at Muswell Hill. Septimus was one of the first to volunteer. He went to France to save an England which consisted almost entirely of Shakespeare's plays and Miss Isabel Pole in a green dress walking in a square. There in the trenches the change which Mr. Brewer desired when he advised football was produced instantly. He developed manliness. He was promoted. He drew the attention, indeed the affection, of his officer, Evans by name. It was a case of two dogs playing on a hearthrug, one worrying a paper screw, snarling, snapping, giving a pinch now and then at the old dog's ear, the other lying somnolent, blinking at the fire, raising a paw, turning and growling good-temperedly. They had to be together, share with each other, fight with each other, quarrel with each other. But when Evans, Risha, who had only seen him once, called him a quiet man, a sturdy red-haired man, undemonstrative in the company of women. When Evans was killed, just before the armistice, in Italy, Septimus, far from showing any emotion, or recognizing that here was the end of a friendship, congratulated himself upon feeling very little and very reasonably. The war had taught him. It was sublime. He had gone through the whole show, friendship, European war, death, had won promotion, was still under 30 and was bound to survive. He was right there. The last shells missed him. He watched them explode with indifference. When peace came he was in Milan, billeted in the house of an innkeeper with a courtyard, flowers in tubs, little tables in the open, daughters making hats, and to Lucretia, the younger daughter, he became engaged one evening when the panic was on him, that he could not feel. For now that it was all over, truce signed and the dead buried, he had, especially in the evening, these sudden thunderclaps of fear. He could not feel. As he opened the door of the room where the Italian girls sat making hats, he could see them, could hear them. They were rubbing wires among coloured beads in saucers. They were turning buckram shapes this way and that. The table was all strewn with feathers, spangles, silks, ribbons. Scissors were rapping on the table, but something failed him. He could not feel. Still, scissors rapping, girls laughing, hats being made protected him. He was assured of safety. He had a refuge. But he could not sit there all night. There were moments of waking in the early morning. The bed was falling. He was falling. Oh, for the scissors and the lamplight and the buckram shapes! He asked Lucretia to marry him, the younger of the two, the gay, the frivolous, with those little artist's fingers that she would hold up and say, "It is all in them." Silk, feathers, what not, were alive to them. "It is the hat that matters most," she would say when they walked out together. Every hat that passed she would examine, and the cloak and the dress and the way the woman held herself. Ill-dressing, overdressing, she stigmatized, not savagely, rather with impatient movements of the hands, like those of a painter who puts from him some obvious well-meant glaring imposture, and then generously, but always critically, she would welcome a shop-girl who had turned her little bit of stuff gallantly, or praise wholly with enthusiastic and professional understanding a French lady descending from her carriage in chinchilla, robes, pearls. "Beautiful," she would murmur, nudging Septimus that he might see. But beauty was behind a pane of glass. Even taste, Risha liked ices, chocolates, sweet things, had no relish to him. He put down his cup on the little marble table. He looked at people outside, happy they seemed, collecting in the middle of the street, shouting, laughing, squabbling over nothing. But he could not taste, he could not feel. In the tea shop among the tables and the chattering waiters, the appalling fear came over him. He could not feel. He could reason. He could read Dante, for example, quite easily. "Septimus, do put down your book," said Risha, gently shutting the Inferno. He could add up his bill. His brain was perfect. It must be the fault of the world, then, that he could not feel. "The English are so silent," Risha said. She liked it, she said. She respected these Englishmen, and wanted to see London, and the English horses, and the tailor-made suits, and could remember hearing how wonderful the shops were from an aunt who had married and lived in Soho. It might be possible, Septimus thought, looking at England from the train window as they left Newhaven, it might be possible that the world itself is without meaning. At the office they advanced him to a post of considerable responsibility. They were proud of him. He had won crosses. "You have done your duty. It is up to us," began Mr. Brewer, and could not finish, so pleasurable was his emotion. They took admirable lodgings off the Tottenham Court Road. Here he opened Shakespeare once more. That boy's business of the intoxication of language, Antony and Cleopatra, had shrivelled utterly. How Shakespeare loathed humanity, the putting on of clothes, the getting of children, the sordidity of the mouth and the belly. This was now revealed to Septimus, the message hidden in the beauty of words, the secret signal which one generation passes under disguise to the next is loathing, hatred, despair. Dante the same. Aeschylus, translated, the same. There Risha sat at the table trimming hats. She trimmed hats for Mrs. Filmer's friends. She trimmed hats by the hour. She looked pale, mysterious, like a lily drowned under water, he thought. "The English are so serious," she would say, putting her arms round Septimus, her cheek against his. Love between man and woman was repulsive to Shakespeare. The business of copulation was filth to him before the end. But Risha said she must have children. They had been married 5 years. They went to the Tower together, to the Victoria and Albert Museum, stood in the crowd to see the King open Parliament. And there were the shops. Hat shops, dress shops, shops with leather bags in the window where she would stand staring. But she must have a boy. She must have a son like Septimus, she said. But nobody could be like Septimus, so gentle, so serious, so clever. Could she not read Shakespeare too? Was Shakespeare a difficult author? She asked. One cannot bring children into a world like this. One cannot perpetuate suffering or increase the breed of these lustful animals who have no lasting emotions, but only whims and vanities, eddying them now this way, now that. End of section 14, read by Hannah Dormer, London, 2nd of May, 2021.